Sean Diddy Combs carried a persona of a business mogul with the resources to do anything he wanted. He had the mansions, the lifestyle, and the clothes. That said, he had more than everyone around him. Can't stop, won't stop. That is not the gray-haired, sweater-wearing person, often in khakis, that we're seeing in court each day. He's accused of sex trafficking and racketeering, and he faces the possibility of spending the rest of his life not in a mansion, but the cold, unforgiving cell of a federal prison. How what he is wearing could be sending a message to the jury about what he wants them to see. What animated moment is catching the attention of people who study body language, and why the Diddy that the defense is presenting may be overdoing it and could spell trouble for the now disgraced music mogul. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. There is only a handful of people who actually know what Sean Combs now looks like since his arrest in September 2024. He's been in jail since his arrest, and cameras aren't allowed in the courtroom for his sex trafficking and racketeering trial. But we have a pretty good idea that the Sean Combs that's showing up in court each day looks a little bit different from the man once known as Puff Daddy, who so many of us grew up watching and listening to. Each day in court, Diddy hasn't been wearing suits. He's been wearing sweaters, often paired with khakis. Here's a sketch of him at the defense table during opening statements. While cameras aren't allowed in the courtroom, here at Law&Crime, our Elizabeth Milner has been in court each day and is telling us what she is seeing. We also have a sketch artist that's showing us some images of what's happening in the courtroom. We do know through these sketches that each day in court, Diddy has not been wearing the suits that you might be accustomed to him seeing. Remember, he's the one behind the luxury brand Sean John. Instead, he's been wearing sweaters, often paired with khakis. Here's a sketch of him in a sweater, this time smiling at his family as he entered court, making a heart shape with his hand. This was from one of the days that his ex-girlfriend Cassie Ventura testified about the alleged abuse that she suffered at the hands of Diddy. Before we get back to what's happening in the courtroom, I want to take a moment and bring you a Law&Crime legal alert. Did you know that children are being diagnosed with serious conditions like type 2 diabetes and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and research is potentially linking ultra-processed foods to these outcomes? Our partners at Morgan & Morgan, they are stepping in to fight to hold food companies accountable. They have decades of experience fighting large corporations, and they're ready to stand up for families who deserve justice. So if your child under 21 has been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes or non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, go to www.forthepeople.com/food. You can also scan this QR code on your screen to learn more. I'll talk more about what moments like this could mean for when the jury eventually gets this case. Now, Elizabeth Milner has been in court each day, giving us the rundown of what the room really felt like during the moments that we see in the sketches or we're reading about in the transcripts. She has said that Diddy also just looks a lot older than many of us remember, almost grandfather-like, in that sweater, in the khakis. And as you can see in these sketches, he also now has gray hair. An interesting note on that gray hair is this image that we found in the evidence that was released by the government of what they seized in the raid on Diddy's Miami mansion in March 2024 ahead of his arrest in September later that year. Not only did federal agents find drugs, adult toys, and guns, they also found, just for men, hair coloring. Now, to be fair, Combs is 55 years old, and in jail, he doesn't have access to those hair coloring products. I bring all of this up because it does appear that the defense is trying to present a softer version of Sean Combs to the jury, a man who is different than the person they saw in that video of Combs chasing down and attacking his ex-girlfriend, Cassie Ventura, at that Los Angeles hotel in 2016. A judge signed an order in April heading into court that said Combs could have 5 shirts, 5 sweaters, 5 pairs of pants, and 2 sets of laceless shoes, which may explain the sweaters for a trial that is expected to last more than a month and a half. But also it's important to see the strategy that is potentially going on here by Diddy's defense team. The wife of one of Diddy's defense lawyers is representing Luigi Mangione in court. And you can see the similarities in what the man accused accused of killing United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, has worn in court, and what Diddy appears to be sporting in his trial. Both sweaters, that much more softer tone. Here's a picture of Combs hugging one of his lawyers that was put together by our sketch artist. So let's talk about the body language, because there are some moments that we have found notable as this trial has gone on now for 2 weeks. There's been several mornings where it does appear, we're told, that Diddy has tried to look like he's in good spirits, whether it's hugging his attorneys or looking at family members in the gallery and making that heart shape with his hand. We've also seen Diddy speaking regularly with his defense team, passing notes during testimony. Then there was this moment that really stood out to us. You can see Diddy leaning back, his hands in the air, and this was when former member of Danity Kane, Dawn Richard, identified him as she started her testimony. Richard had claimed in that testimony that she witnessed Combs physically attack Cassie Ventura multiple times. And you can see in this sketch, when she pointed at Combs, Diddy with his hands in the air and leaning back. Now the question was, as you look at this, was this a playful moment? Was it Diddy actually being defensive to someone that he once worked with who now is accusing him in court? It's really hard to say. And it was even hard to say for people who were in the courtroom and witnessed this moment. Elizabeth Milner told us that she could see Diddy was not smiling during this, so it was hard to know whether it was a funny moment, but it certainly was out of the ordinary for what this case has been like on the inside. Joining us now to talk about this is body language expert and jury consultant Susan Constantine. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. It's challenging because we do have a reporter who's in the courtroom every day, Elizabeth Milner. She's doing a great job describing what she's seeing, and then we have these courtroom sketches. And so it's not video, but we're kind of piecing together what the mood may be inside this courtroom for this big case. From some of the sketches you've seen and from what we've been hearing, what stands out to you just initially of how Sean Combs appears to be acting?
Well, there's it's interesting because I compare this to what his normal baseline is when I'm looking at him in multiple different scenarios, right? He always has that somewhat stoic look. He's very much in control. There's not a lot of expression most often with Diddy anyway. So when we're looking at him in the courtroom, it's very controlled. So with that being said, what is the meaning behind that? Comparing that to his typical baseline, could it be strategic? Could it be that he is intentionally trying to keep his emotions in check so he's not overly or overt expressive or showing any sort of anger or resentment, as furrowing the eyebrows or intensity or stalking or coercive control. So all of this is really important. So what I'm overall looking at is his demeanor in those sketches, which is not in real time. So I'm not really seeing the emotions morph on and off the face and how long the emotions stay, the duration of it is, or the synchrony of it. So I don't have that. All we're looking at is a still photo. But it seems to be that he has put himself into a mindset, either as coached by his attorneys to not show the emotions, keep his emotions in check, appear as if he is more normalized and not expressive. But one moment, of course, of when he threw his arms up, right? So that was a different from his baseline. So that's what I'm talking about. We look at the baseline and we look at those deviations from the baseline. That means something. So when it deviates like that, that's telling us what was the stimulus, a probe, a question, an accusation. In this point, it was a finger pointing right towards him. So what is that? The hand goes up. When we think about OJ, what did he do? He had the hands up and he's demonstrating. So it was a very demonstrative gesturing. So he did it so large, which is up here. So it's above the ear. So this is intentional, like someone that wants to bring attention to something. It's animated. It's larger than within our smaller frame, right? So that was intentional. So in my opinion, I thought it was intentional. It was one to saying, hey, I'm taken back. He's being defensive, very guarded attack. And I think that he did that as if he was trying to appear as if, like, his hands are up like he's like innocent. Oftentimes we'll see when people are arrested, what do? They put their hands up over their head. So as they surrender. But that's not the case here. So I think this was intentional. I think he was trying to set a message like, whoa, and defensive, right? And he wanted the jury to see that, right? Because he
Right.
wanted to appear as if like that was you're attacking me, and that's just not the truth, and I feel offended by it.
That was because when I saw the sketch, and we'll get the sketches typically at the end of the day or the next day, and you try to piece together what you were reading in a transcript and what we were hearing in court with what you're looking at in these sketches. And that one stood out to me, and I was like, what was going on there? Because to this point, I know he's communicated with his attorneys and he seems to be
Mm-hmm.
very active. He'll greet his family, but then to have that moment with Don Richard, and Elizabeth, who's in the courtroom for us, said she couldn't really see his facial expression, but it was kind of an odd moment where it wasn't like lighthearted, where there was laughter in the courtroom, and it was kind
Mm-hmm.
of just up in the air. I get, what type of message could that send to the jury, considering that that's, to this point, as far as any sort of body language movement in the courtroom, we haven't seen
Mm-hmm.
anything like that from him up until that happened here in the second week of his trial.
Yeah, so what that could show is that he disagreed. So that is sending the message like, whoa, I disagree with that. I could be appalled by that. Wait a minute, I'm being attacked. All of those kinds of meanings. And there's not just one meaning to a gesture, there's multiple things. That's why you have to take everything into context. So, what is the jury thinking? They're looking and they're going, whoa, what was that? He just threw his arms up. So, when he threw his arms up, each one of those jurors are going to interpret that differently. That's the problem, Chris, because not everyone is going to think about the same thing, except for maybe when they get back into the room during deliberations and they may mention, hey, did you see when he threw his hands up? So one of them might say, hey, well, he did that because naturally he got caught, right? His hands are up in surrender. He was doing that because he was defensive or he was appalled, taken back, and or just a natural attack defense that he had. And I would seem that it tends to be more that because he's also leaning back. So if he was being coercive, he would be leaning forward. He's not, he's leaning back and the hands are up. And so that was sending a signal because it was outside the presentation zone and it was upward. So that was intentional to be large and demonstrative to send a nonverbal message to the jury that he didn't agree and he was taken back by it and appalled by it and he was feeling attacked.
Yeah, and I'll correct myself. That was on Friday of last week, so it would have been at the end of the first week of his trial. Each day he's been in court, it stood out to me the fashion choices he's making, because when I think of Sean Combs, and he's often in a suit, he is the head of Sean John, which is a suit line, but he's gone with the white undershirt and khakis and sweater look, and it's a tan
Mhm.
sweater as well. What stands out to you about the message that might be trying to be sent by wearing that each day?
Well, let me back up a little bit on that because I did do some research and it was what I found. And if this is the case, that they actually had a hearing about it, what he could wear. That, he wanted to get out of the orange jumpsuit. He wanted to be able to wear clothing in court. So they were allowing him to bring in, I think, 5 button down shirts, 5 sweaters, of course, slacks and so forth, and different shoes. If that's the case, then that is what the court decided they would allow. However, that's not been my experience as a trial consultant because as a trial consultant, I dress my clients for court. So I provide an entire trial wardrobe every single day, depending on what was going to be presented that day. So it is actually, you're theming, right? You're trying to set a
Oh,
theme, an impression. The fact that he's grayed out, right? His hair color, of course, has grown out because he doesn't have hair color in the jail. His, of course, and he's wearing the scruff here, and he's got gray showing there, and he's wearing the sweater, looking like a grandpa sweater. And what he's trying to do is to appear as if he is minimizing his physical intimidation. So they're trying to soften it. And also by the tan, ugly shirt, which looks probably terrible on his skin color, it's going to make him look very dull, as if he's like to appear as if he's, I want to say the word sickly, but nondescript, not the power person that he normally appears in his normal attire. So what would my game plan be? Not the sweater and the shirt if I had control over it. I would certainly have Diddy appear just like Diddy, toned down dramatically for the court. So I would have put him in a suit, but I wouldn't have put him into the flashy suit and all the jewelry and all of that attire to go along with it. So I think that was kind of a not a good suggestion. That's not what I would have done. That's just on my own personal opinion, and I'm not the trial consultant in this case.
And for him, because I do, I mean, when you think of the mogul of Diddy, and so many of us grew up with his music, and then he's just kind of been this presence across the brands, like he always seems like the boss of whatever he's in charge of. And, you know, with the charges he's facing, that could, you know, be something that brings him down. But from some of the body language as well of how he's sitting in some of these pictures, like there's one where I just don't think of Sean Combs as someone who sits back with his legs crossed, kind of like a grandfather. In some ways. And he is, I mean, he's an older guy at this point. I mean, you forget that he's in his, I think he's in his 50s, right? So what stands out to you with just the way it appears these sketches show us of how he's sitting in court, and even at times during some pretty tough testimony?
Yeah, relaxed. So he has told himself to just sit back and relax. Don't be reactive, and don't be reactive. Sit back and hear the hear the testimony, but don't show any sort of overt expressions or body language movements. So the fact that he's leaning back with his legs crossed, that's actually a power move. It's what we call a four corner stance, where they sometimes they will an individual will cross their legs over, and that is kind of a power stance, especially when they're leaning back. We see this a lot with people that are so comfortable, but they're also arrogant. Of course, he doesn't have his hands behind his head, but he is leaning back in a comfort position. The fact that he doesn't show any sort of rigidity in his doesn't show that he's really taking this super serious. But I also think that's performance. I think that he is actually doing that purposefully. So when he's not showing that rigid, leaning in intensity look, I think he wants to appear softer, kind of in the backdrop, not so big and overt, because he's generally like he said, he's like the star, right? He's always very big and loud and intense in his movements. Now he's playing the more subdued Diddy. The problem with that is, Chris, is such a stark contrast, and that's where I'm always concerned about with anyone that is dressing and coaching their witnesses or their defendants. I always say to make small tweaks to make big changes. I don't make big changes, because the younger crowd in there is going to go, I'm going to call BS on this one, right? The older people are going to go, well, they don't really know who Diddy is anyway, so they wouldn't know what to compare it to. And then we can talk about the jury demographics, because it really is all over the place.
Yeah, and I want to talk about the demographics in just a moment, because I think it's important through all the testimony that we're hearing, we remember who the main audience is for it, and understanding how they may take in what they're hearing on the stand. One other body language thing for Diddy, I guess, would be that he's been communicating a lot, apparently, with his attorneys, that he's been talking with them throughout. Everybody has a right to talk to their counsel. He's someone who's often in control, so I'm sure for him it must be difficult having people speak for you in some ways. But how coordinated is that he's made a decision that that's what he's going to do during this trial? Or is it just kind of naturally how things work in the courtroom?
Yeah, and different defendants do different things. So we see this even in the Karen Reed court case, where she's always constantly talking to her attorneys, and it's like sending a message. It's almost as if he's wanting the jury to see that he is making a comment. So even though he's moving and gesturing towards his attorney as if it's a whisper, we don't know what he's actually saying. But the fact that he's actually carrying out that act is telling the jury there's something in what was just said that caused him to react. So I look at cause and effect, because anytime there's a deviation or a change, it's something I put pen to the paper with. So I try to find, okay, is there any sort of what I would say is a theme? Is there something that constantly stands out to where he's going to want to make mention to his attorney? Could be a disagreement. That's not quite what it is. And he shows a furrowed eyebrow or pursing of the lips or narrowed eyes. What is it? Or surprise, like, I can't believe what you saw. We're not seeing the facial expressions. That's the part that's hard. But I tell my clients, if you've got something you want to say, write it on a piece of paper and shove it over to me, okay? Because you don't want to have that back and forth talk, because it's also distracting, right? So it's taking it away from what the attorneys are saying, and also the cross-examination of a witness. And when they see that, it takes their eyes off from that and onto Diddy, because they want to see what he's doing and why he's reacting that way. So all of that stuff is sending a message. So those nonverbal messages speak volumes. 93% of what we say is nonverbal. And so I'm sure that the jurors are taking note, like, why was he constantly always whispering? Because he's actually very involved in his defense, and he may be instructing his attorney that what he agrees with, what he doesn't agree with, and what he wants to say, because you have to remember, Diddy is always a controller. So I don't know if that's something as a form of leakage, that he's got to say something because he feels he's losing control and he wants to bring his attorneys into check because it's happening in real time at that moment, and he wants to either address or readdress something at that time.
And then let's talk about this jury, because it's been a little bit of time since they were selected, and the focus and a lot of the coverage was on the jury selection. But now, as testimony's gone on, the focus has been on the testimony. What stands out to you that people should think about when they hear this testimony, and who the audience is that testimony is speaking to?
Yeah, so when you're picking a jury, actually it's deselection, right? In jury selection, we don't get to pick juries, we can only deselect jurors. So, I mean, there was a quite diverse group of people. So, first thing is we're going to look at and myself, is demographics, right? In my mind, if I'm going into a case and I were working on as a defense for this case, I would be looking at, which ones are very authoritarian. I'm going to be singling those out. Which are ones that are more of the middle ground people. I call it the blue collar, kind of the egalitarian types of jurors. So there's an initial screening of the demographic factors, and then we're splitting them, and then I'm giving them a score 1 to 5, where I'm thinking where they may lay, but that's only just a baseline, because of course in voir dire, this is when you start to extract more information, you learn more about them. But overall, when I'm looking at the demographics, we have quite a wide spread. We've got those that are in their very young 30s, which are probably into hip hop and all that kind of cool stuff. And then you've got the 70-year-olds who are more elderly. They probably could care less, not into it at all. I think those are going to be very dangerous for Diddy, because those people have kind of gone through life and all their craziness and everything else. And I don't think those are going to be the most forgiving of his alternate lifestyle. Now, listen, if they were living in Florida at the Villages, I'd have a different conversation, because those people are a little bit wild out there. But we're not talking about the same demographic area. So we're looking at, there's a scientist, a PhD in biology and neuroscience. This is a very, very analytical. He's going to be very research driven. And so he's going to be putting the pieces together. I think he's probably going to be could be a 4-person in it. We've got a social worker. I think that she might follow maybe the Me Too movement, which would be best for the defense. We've got a physician's assistant. She may be talking also the same thing, is seeing injuries of domestic violence. I mean, that could work for the defense, for the prosecution. So, and then we've got the massage therapist, probably more defense. We got a deli clerk, probably more defense. But again, I don't know their ages. And we got several of them, of course, that are retirees. So those retirees are going to be very problematic for Diddy Combs. Very bad.
That's interesting. Yeah, the social worker being on there too. I imagine when they go into the back room, someone with kind of professional experience of dealing with cases of abuse, what that voice could be like when it comes to some of Cassie's testimony. It's not a domestic violence case. It's proving that there was a larger operation going on. But just that voice seems like that would be an interesting one eventually when this gets to deliberations. I also think it's important to note too, like I think of like my parents, I don't know how much they know about Sean Combs. I always think of like, oh, he's one of the most famous people on planet Earth. But then, you think of some older people, how much they actually know or listen to music that he's produced. In your experience, I know you said 93% of our communication's nonverbal. When it comes to a verdict and what's talked about in that jury room, and we got a long way to go until we get to that point. How often is it the body language things, the clothing, the way that Diddy may be sitting that could come in and factor and be a difference maker? Could it be a difference maker, or is it really the testimony that at the end of the day trumps everything?
Well, how many times have we covered these trials, and what do juries say afterwards? They didn't show any sort of remorse or empathy or concern. And that was always, they always come out with that. It's like the first thing that comes out of their mouth. I didn't believe him because, X, Y, and Z. People naturally, whether they want to admit it or not, we do look at people and we make judgments about them. We make judgments about their lifestyle. We make judgments about the way they dress, and of course the facts in this case. They've already formed that judgment from the very beginning. So what they're doing is they're looking over at him, going, "Does he look like that kind of guy that can do it, or is he in a disguise? Is he trying to pull off?" A big whopper to appear like he's innocent. Now, I think they overplayed it so huge for him. I don't think that was going to work well for him. But anyway, yes, nonverbal communication, 93% is nonverbal. People will judge you based on the words you say, which he's not testifying. But on the other hand, what some of the witnesses are stating, they're also assessing the credibility of those witnesses, and also their gesturing and their facial expressions and their emotions. Are those witnesses tugging at the heartstrings of a particular juror? See, all you need is just one, right? All you need just one to say, "You know what, I think he's not guilty." I mean, all you need is one. Personally, I think we've got a higher chance of, jury nullification, saying, "Listen, even though the state didn't prove their case," which I think they are doing a good job, but it's still up in the air. They may just say, "You know what, we just want this guy off the street," and they can do that if they choose to.
It's fascinating to think about, and this is just another, the body language, the makeup of the jury. I mean, it's something that you just have to think about throughout this trial with all the testimony that we're hearing. And it's kind of an interesting dynamic too, because we don't have cameras in the courtroom. Susan Constantine, body language expert, jury consultant. This was a fascinating discussion. Thanks for coming on Law and Crime.
It's my pleasure.
Sean Combs' trial is expected to last another 6 or 7 weeks. He's charged with racketeering, sex trafficking by force, and transportation to engage in prostitution. He has pleaded not guilty. That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube as well as Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.